Widening social rifts define our era, driven by indignant anger and manipulation through engineered fear and division. To move forward and heal, we need secure men and strong women. But more importantly, we must learn how to listen to each other. As I asked women around me how I could help, I started to understand that the idea I once considered a conclusion was only the beginning.
Women want to be heard, but it's not enough yet. So don't just hear us, but hear us when we say that everything that's happening is not enough to treat us as fully valuable, fully worthy human beings, equal in every way to men.
A unified answer that branches out into infinite diversity with one common factor. The people not listening tend to be men.
But women cannot make men listen, and certainly cannot integrate what they hear into understanding and action. Only men can do that for themselves.
So if men can't listen to women, LGBTQ+, minority groups, or other people with different perspectives, maybe they can listen to a man having a conversation with these people. I'm inviting you into my journey to become a better listener and meet some intriguing people along the way. Hello and welcome to the If Men Can't Listen To podcast. And today, this is somebody that I met a long time ago before I even decided that this was going to be a podcast on Instagram while trying to figure out direction. And today we're going to have a conversation with Amber and get to know her. Her Instagram handle is amber.overthinking. And so do you want to introduce yourself a little bit? And how did you decide to make what you're doing your calling?
Well, thanks. I appreciate having the opportunity to be here and to talk with you, Shane. And it's been fun to get to know you as we're both trying to navigate this space of advocacy for things that are important to us. And I have always been a really passionate person. I remember I have always had such really strong intense feelings and care and concern for other people. And it can be really overwhelming sometimes. And so I think I've just kind of naturally progressed in this way through my life to focus more on mental health and that impacts everything in our lives. And so it touches all of the topics that people are advocating for and how these things impact people's mental health in very systemic and even surface level ways, but that ultimately helping people with their mental health the best that we can while trying to dismantle oppressive systems is how we are going to achieve better mental health as a society. And that's what I feel really passionate about.
So we decided to have a podcast episode happen after a conversation on Instagram about parenting. And the topic started getting a little bit big and, hey, maybe this is a good conversation to let other people listen in on because maybe people could find some use in it. And I think really a lot of it happened around the concept of redefining masculinity, which is something I came out of the gate pretty hard with as a purpose before I even decided to make this a podcast. And it's something that you have some pretty strong opinions about too, regarding parenting.
Yeah. So I have a few kids and I'm a divorced single mom. So I'm trying to navigate parenting as a solo parent and trying to compensate for not having that typical nuclear family and having a male and female role model. And that doesn't just apply to single moms, but to homosexual couples and trans, non-binary, that there's this conversation needs to be expanded beyond that to understand what masculinity means and how to teach that to all of our children, regardless of sex and gender, to be able to have emotional intelligence and not the toxic masculinity roles of suppressing emotion and toughen up and men don't cry, things that have been harmful to men, that have not allowed them to express their emotions and gain the emotional intelligence that we're seeing a lack of right now, that is seen as a lack of empathy often, and that women have had to do this emotional labor for a long time. And that there's become like this, rubbing against each other thing where we can't quite connect. And with the male loneliness epidemic, as they call it, and things like that. But I think that we're being polarized more in the more we talk about masculine and feminine energy or roles, gender roles and stuff, instead of coming together as human beings and understanding that we all have emotions and we all need to understand how to feel them, process them, release them in healthy ways, not punch a hole in the wall or demean women as being too emotional to be leaders or something like that. But that we are all human and we all have human emotions and we all need to know how to do this work. We all need to gain emotional intelligence and maturity and be able to communicate effectively so that we can live together, in a society that is accepting and inclusive of all people and is willing to try and help each other belong in that space and have the things that they need to survive and thrive in a society. Why wouldn't we want that for everyone,
Right. And I feel like a lot of it is hinged on this idea where we've all been like flung into competition. Like I know there's the internal competition on women's side, but there's also this whole idea of competitive masculinity. And a lot of people call it toxic masculinity. And I feel, yes, the end product is toxic masculinity, but I think the root cause, there's a direct line, an arrow from one to the other between competitive masculinity and toxic masculinity. And I think a lot of it, as far as gender roles, is on the concept of ranked gender. Like if one gender is more worthwhile than another, it's the same reason why it's kind of a thing where trans men threaten cis men a lot less than trans women, because it's okay, well, they've traded up and then a trans woman has traded down. But that is completely false and insulting. But it's all this whole idea that we've got back to the dawn of agriculture. We've been sitting with this bad idea running our dynamic for millennia that women aren't worth as much as men.
Right. And that's the hierarchy that is patriarchy that we still exist in. And that's what we need to dismantle, is that there is anyone that is categorically more advanced or special or better than anyone else, that men are not above women, and that that there is no race that is better than another race, that those don't exist, and those are constructs that have been perpetuated for so long that we have to address and combat and challenge our ideas and rigid thinking about that. And the problem is that our brains are really prone to stick with what's familiar because it feels safe, even if it's not good. In a lot of cases, it's just the uncertainty of pushing beyond that is so scary to our brain that we'll choose a familiar hell over some uncertainty. And that's often why people stay in toxic relationships for so long, is because the thought of, well, what will I do on my own? And will I ever find someone else? And maybe this is as good as it gets, and things like that. And so we convince ourselves to stay in what's familiar because our brains are designed to keep us alive, safe, but not happy. And so that's why we have to push through these things to evolve and become more self-aware and empathetic people. And I should probably say that, my undergrad is in family studies and psychology, and I'm working on a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. So psychology and the brain and how that works is my thing that I love the most. And so, yeah, that's what I study. So,
and I'm similarly fit. I'm in an industrial career, and a lot of that is because I'm fascinated by the complexity and inner workings of large mechanical and electrical systems. And it's just something that gets me excited in a way that other people look at me and go, "Are you okay?" So I can empathize with that. It's another complex system that's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, and that's what it is for me, and just how it intersects with absolutely everything that we do, and that I think a lot of people aren't aware of the tendencies of the brain and human behavior and stuff, and that we think that it's a matter of willpower, and that in so many cases, and it's not. And that while most human brains are capable of learning, not every brain can learn at the same rate or to the same capacity. Like, I will never be a savant or a genius. That's my brain is limited in its capacity for knowledge and understanding. I will always progress and keep learning, but it's not a shame-based thing to not be as intelligent or the best. And that comes back to like the competition and trying to make people be hyper independent, especially as Americans, that you have to be the best at everything and that you don't need anybody else. And so we've not only disconnected the sexes, but we've disconnected everyone. And we need each other as a society and culture to work together collectively for our good and not just worry about ourselves. Like, we can't put our head in the sand and pretend that it doesn't affect us. Even if you are a cishet white male in America, this all affects you too. And patriarchy, I think it's really hard for men to see how patriarchy has harmed them, and a lot of them don't. And I think it's really interesting. People are talking about that Love is Blind episode, and that she left the guy at the altar because he just hadn't thought about things that were really important to her, like gay marriage and things like that. And that's what privilege does, is it blinds us to be able to see those things because it doesn't affect us. And it's not because you're a bad person. It's because you haven't been woken up to it. You haven't been able to see it. And we don't socialize, boys and men particularly, to look around at the big picture and see how what they do affects other people. And that ties into the hyper individualism, is that I'm just worried about me and my life and my job and my money and my family and my house and my car. And we need to understand that we are all interconnected, and we need to be able to figure out how to coexist and make it work.
And I think like a lot of that traces back to, and we're talking about like child development and stuff, and maybe you can speak more about this, but like the play that kids do, and it's all gendered, and it's very on the boys' side, it's all very competitive, and I'm the best, and I won, and this and that. And I'm just kind of wondering, I feel like girls' play is a lot more collaborative, and I feel like all of this artificial competition, how do I say this? It's really profitable to keep people from helping each other, keep
Yes.
people from collaborating, because then they're a lot easier to manipulate. And I feel like that has been going on also along with the patriarchy for thousands of years. But I mean,
Yes.
it all gets reinforced from day one by how we play as kids.
In so many ways, from even just putting a bow on your baby's head to make sure that it's identified as a girl and things like that. Where did these ideas come from, and why do we conform to them? And do we need to? And like, yes, I put a bow on my baby girl too, and I loved it and whatever, but like, that's because she doesn't have a say yet. She can't speak. And so, but we have to be open to possibility. And if you can't be open to the possibility of who your child is becoming, you shouldn't have children. And I remember in college and that learning about all this and child development and parenting and things and how to raise children and socialize them and things like that I was very, very conscious that, and I have both sexes of children, and I wanted to make sure that they both knew and had access to toys of the opposite gender. And it was interesting because in a lot of ways, and the reason the binary is so pervasive and popular is because, we have the bell curve, right? And most people will fall into line with the traditional gender identifiers, right? But we can't dismiss the people on the other ends of the spectrum. Like, we just can't. And so we have to allow room for that. And I made sure that like we had a play kitchen that was like not bright pink. It was just colors for everyone and things. And it's just, there were Barbies and Legos and cars and baby dolls. I, gave my son a baby doll before his sister was born so that we could practice, and that he's so nurturing and so kind. And those are things that are so important in any human being. I think that you're right in a lot of sense that masculinity is this competition, and it may come down to redefining masculinity entirely, because it's not about being better than anyone, but being able to be your best self. Like, you don't have to one up everybody, and you can have feelings, and you can do these things, that you can be nurturing, and you can love fashion, and like that we've shamed and stigmatized gender and sexual orientation and all of those things so much to shame people, men in particularly, that you throw like a girl, you look like a girl, your hair is long like a girl, you know, you can't wear pink, be a man. These silly, silly things that really have no consequence in life, but that they add up to be this cumulative thing that is an oppressive patriarchy that harms boys and men and women and girls and all genders, that we're trying to define it as this rigid thing, and it's not. We have to allow space for nuance and a spectrum. And just the focus, I think, should be more importantly placed on raising children to be emotionally intelligent rather than fixating on their gender, femininity, masculinity, those things. And even, like we, as a single mom and stuff, like I have felt guilty and worried about that my kids don't have that male role model that I thought or planned on. And they still have a dad in their lives and that, but it's just different dynamic. And so I've worried about that, though, and that I am lacking in some way or harming my children in some way because life didn't turn out this way for us. And there is undeniable harm that will be done. There's going to be impact that I can't account for. And that's one thing that I think people are really, we don't talk about these things, and we expect people to be perfect parents. And we have such huge debates about gentle parenting and tough love and all of these things. And that's really like not the point. And so much of it is based on getting the desired behavior that we don't focus on what's driving the behavior in the beginning. And that when we focus on raising children with emotional intelligence, those things don't matter so much. And they can choose whichever place in that spectrum they feel most comfortable with without feeling forced into it. A lot of times society, patriarchy, and religion and stuff put us in those boxes the day we are born with that pink bow or that blue blanket.
This is the policy that we took with our kids. And it was, and how's the best way to put this one? Let them sort out who they are. Don't tell them who they are.
Yeah.
And that's really, it's helped them a lot in figuring out who they are, what they want to do. And circling back too, with this whole idea of gendered toys. One of my favorite things I've ever heard about that is there are no gender toys unless you're supposed to operate them with your genitalia. And if so, then what are you doing giving them to kids?
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, when you think about it, both of the standard genders, and I'm going to say that in a broad term because there's a gender is a spectrum.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't agree with that, but tough. That's what it is. Anyhow,
well, that's reality, and that's okay. And I think
right.
I think the thing too, in trying to explain this though, is that like now we have the language to describe it better, right? Science learns, and we classify things in categories as specifically as we possibly can. And the binary just does not fit.
No,
it doesn't. Scientifically, it doesn't. And whether those people that started with the binary, that was all that they knew and experienced, and so that's what they went with, or if they were being cruelly exclusionary and think that trans and non-binary people should not exist, it doesn't matter anymore because we know that they have existed since the beginning of time and that we need to be inclusive and that there is a place for them here, and we want them to enrich our lives, and we want them to have happy and full lives and live well into adulthood, that they belong here and are loved and needed and wanted like any of the rest of us would want any child to feel, and not try to define who they can be in these rigid gender roles, putting people in these boxes. I have an extended relative that had a couple of sons, and she was pregnant with her third baby, and they found out what it was, and it was going to be another boy, and her son cried. One of her sons cried because he wanted a sister, he said, so that he could play with girl toys. And it was so fascinating to me that at such a young age, he knew that was the only socially acceptable way for him to be able to even entertain what it would be like to play with a baby doll or a Barbie or whatever it is, because of how we socialize boys and girls. And I'm not saying that it's a parent's fault thing too. It's just society as a whole. And then we do what we know and we do what we were taught. And so many of us say that like we don't want to become like our parents, but we do in so many ways because it's, again, just the brain and it's what's familiar. And so we do what we know until we know better. And so by having these conversations, expanding our language, we can be more inclusive and we can, evolve from this binary to a spectrum. And it's going to be hard and it's going to take time to change because we still want to say like men and women, moms and dads, male and female and stuff. And we have to allow for parents and caretakers and caregivers and whatever language that's more inclusive. And I understand that can be annoying and frustrating to people and that this is something that I have had to learn. So yeah, I was raised in a religious conservative community and those gender roles were very, very specific. And that was my sole purpose and calling in life was to be a wife and a mother. And that has impacted my life in many ways that have been detrimental, specifically that every single day that I was a stay-at-home mom. And then after my divorce, a few years later, I got sick and became disabled. I have POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And I can't work, but I have to work because we live in a capitalistic society and I don't qualify for disability because I was a stay-at-home mom not paying into the system. And so when we say that we're pro-life and we're pro-family, and then we are like, but you get disabled and we're not going to help you or take care of you because you're expendable to society. And especially like, I can't have more children. So what, am I just a waste of resources? It's frustrating. And those things are hard because those are the things that we're taught from a very young age. And I was just trying to do what I thought was right and best and be what I was supposed to be. And, married really young and had kids really young before my brain was fully developed, at 25, 27.
Yeah. Just before we move on too far, this is something really I don't want to skip past because this is super, super, super important for men to understand and some women too, is that women's labor is priceless, but at the same time, it's worthless. It has no value in society. We cannot live without it. We say we can't live without it to the point where we say that women belong in the home because that's work that needs to be done, but we assign all of the importance in the world, but we assign no value to it. And it is one of the biggest frustrating hypocrisies in this whole patriarchal dynamic is that if this is so important, then why don't we recognize it?
Right. And especially when you consider that I was a stay-at-home mom for 14 years. Thankfully, I had a bachelor's degree and gave birth to my son 2 months after I graduated. So I never worked in my field and became a stay-at-home mom. And then I was a stay-at-home mom for 14 years. And then my husband left me. And I was starting over from the very bottom. I had just graduated college. I had no work experience, nothing. No one cares that I was a stay-at-home mom running a household and managing children and special needs or health problems or whatever, it doesn't matter because it's not seen as valuable. And we say it is, but we don't treat it that way. And the frustrating thing is that my ex-husband could only have had the lucrative and stable career and advancement opportunities he had because I was at home raising our children so that he could work late and he could travel often and do those things, and that he had magically clean socks and underwear appear in his drawer. That I deserve nothing, and how dare I, we divorced and I can't believe she took half of your things, and it's like, we built this life together. That was the goal and the vision, and we divide it so unfairly and specifically monetarily. And I know there are people who have done the math to say how much it would cost if you didn't breastfeed, and it's staggering. And I'm like, excuse me, can we renegotiate this divorce agreement? Because and I got preeclampsia with my pregnancies and almost died and stuff. And and now we're finding out that that's linked to the father's DNA and stuff. And I'm like, this is that was such a risk of my life, and that I did this with my life to the point that I am unable to support myself now because I got disabled through no fault of my own. Mm-hmm. And that's really, really incredibly frustrating, especially because You get treated like you are stupid or lazy or whatever. And that could not be further from the truth, that like I have fought so hard to to get my education as quickly as possible before I had children. I loved being a stay-at-home mom. It was so hard, but it was so rewarding, and I am so grateful for that privilege, because not everyone even gets that privilege of being able to have a choice to stay home.
And I just want to ask you this, and this is sort of like asking you as in the listener of this podcast as well. Can you think of any other field where you're working 80 plus hour weeks, you do not get weekends off, but you would not qualify for disability?
Yeah.
That is incredibly telling at how undervalued women's labor in the home is, especially in those things where one parent works and one parent stays at home. It just circles back to how priceless it is, but how worthless we make it.
Right. And that's actually, sorry, there's so many thoughts going on in my mind right now, but that's actually one of the cases that Ruth Bader Ginsburg started prosecuting to get towards gender equality, was that she was representing a man who was a caregiver for his elderly mother, and that we had this caregiver tax break, and he wasn't eligible for it because we assumed in the law that the caregivers were women. And so that was how it was like, oh, like, yes. And it was one of the most brilliant, beautiful cases ever. Just that we needed the men to see from a male perspective how this was harming them too. Because it's hard to see. I get that it's hard to see what isn't your experience. I'm a cishet white woman. I will never know what it's like to be a man. I will never know what it's like to be gay. I will never know what it's like to be black. I will never know those things because that isn't my experience in this life. But that doesn't mean that I can't learn and have empathy for others that have a different experience in this world than me, and that I want them truly to have all of the opportunities that I have, and privileges and safety and food and access and education to all of those things. The other thing I was going to say, in terms of that society as a whole, and patriarchy specifically, is built on the unpaid labor of women. Especially realizing this, and this is honestly, like, before I became disabled, this was not something that was on my radar, but I'm learning too. We all are learning. And when we know better, we do better, right? Like Maya Angelou said. And so I'm trying to do better. That when you have a baby, we didn't have like standard maternity leave or paid parental leave or whatever. And you're just expected to go home and recover, and women take care of each other. They bring you meals. They take care of you. They do the things so that you can survive. They donate their paid time off to the mom that just had a baby so she can stay home and be paid and not starve. And so if we say we value these things, then we need to show up with our money and support these things. But it's also like, if you become disabled, that we do not provide enough in Social Security, disability for people to live beyond poverty. They can't get more than $2,000 in their bank account, or they lose Medicaid or food stamps. And so we don't allow people to have the opportunity to get out of that situation, to save and to find a way to better support themselves beyond poverty. They're trapped, or they'll lose their benefits and the healthcare that they need. And the other thing is too, is that like, so when I talk to people and I'm like, I don't have contact with my family of origin, and I don't know what to do. And they're like, well, you don't qualify for disability because you weren't paying into the system. And but I did functional ability testing, and they're like, if you can get a job that is strictly sedentary and no more than part-time, well, I can't live off that. Nobody can. So what am I supposed to do? I'm in this impossible situation, and I have brought it to every expert, social worker, psychologist, doctor, everybody, all of my friends for the last 4.5 years, and nobody can offer me a solution. And I am just, it's heartbreaking and terrifying. And then we end up with like GoFundMes for people that get cancer because we don't take care of them. Mm-hmm. We don't help people stay alive. And when people are sick and dying, who do we expect to take care of them? It generally falls to the unpaid labor of women. And so it's, if you have a baby, if you need help with raising children, if someone is sick and disabled or elderly and dying, we, generally speaking, rely on the unpaid labor of women to make up for where we lack in social support for those things. And that's not fair. Not everybody has a family. And why wouldn't we want everybody to have the care that they need and deserve?
And also, I just want to, again, circle back at something I feel like you might have skipped over, because it's sometimes when you're close to something, it's hard to see. A lot of people look at people who need Social Security as to use an awful thing that was said by an awful person, the parasite class. And it's like, hold up. Not only, like, you explained exactly why it's hard to get out of. Not only that, but you're a great example of what people do or can do with that opportunity. You've gone back to school. You're trying to reshape your life in a way that works with your disability and allows you to be a contributing fiscally. And that's a whole other tangent. You can, oh yeah, they don't contribute to society. No, I'm sorry. They don't contribute to the labor force. They contribute plenty to a society. But the thing that always, they said, oh, you're not a contributing member of society. Well, you're literally trying to go through a field, adapt to your disability into a field that helps people. And that, to me, sounds like you are beyond a contributing member of society, and you're doing everything you can to be a contributing member of the labor force. It's just they make it really hard, like you said, to get out of that.
Yeah. And the last thing I want is, I think most of us, we have pride. And I think most of us, the last thing we want is to need help, to ask for help. Again, going back to the hyper independence, and that's the ultimate sign of success, and that I have somehow failed in life because I can't be as independent and mobile and participate in life in the way that most people can, or that I would want to. And that just because I still do have the capacity to contribute intellectually or however I can in society and pursuing my degree and stuff, doesn't mean that somebody that does not have the physical or mental capability doesn't deserve the right to live and be cared for. And that we would expect their parents to carry that burden of the financial cost that it would take to take care of a child that was like that. And so if we're saying that we're pro-life and we want more babies and all of these things, then you have to show up for all babies, all children, all women, regardless of what color of skin they have, what sexual orientation they are, how they identify with their gender and sex. It doesn't matter. And if they are able-bodied or have a disability, that we have to collectively decide that every life is worth saving, or we're falling into this eugenics horrifying shit of deciding who gets to live and who dies. And it's happening a lot in politics right now with the things that we're getting rid of, Medicaid for senior citizens. And what are we saying, and what do we value in a society? This is just, it certainly isn't people, and that is heartbreaking to me every single day.
Yeah, and and if they actually cared about the people, it wouldn't be a thing where they're forcing people into this inertia of being in the system. They would be finding ways to help these people adapt around their disability to contribute in a way that they would want to contribute. And I don't know anyone who's ever been put on the sidelines like that wants to stay there. I can't name one person who ever decided, well, I guess I'm just going to sit in my living room and watch TV for the rest of my life. Everybody I know who has been disabled wants to find a sense of purpose.
Yeah, people need to feel like they have some purpose and meaning in their lives. And people mock and make fun and say that oh, well, I wish I could lay around all day and take a nap and just watch TV and stuff. No, you don't. Especially when you feel awful. You do not. And yeah, maybe you are overworked and burnout, and a week of vegging would feel amazing. And that's another issue, that we overwork people and we undercompensate them so that we don't have a good quality of life to balance for good mental health. We just drive people into the ground, and it's expected, and that's just how it is. And we don't do anything to change it. Why wouldn't we want better for all of us? And there's also the welfare queens term that I really, really hate. That I can't, this is ridiculous. No one can live like this. I am not living like a queen. I feel awful every day. There's not a lot of productive time. And the thing that is hard, though, is that people will judge me and look at me and say, well, you don't look sick. And so then they're saying that they're assuming that I'm either lazy or stupid or something, that like, I don't know how to make this acceptable for you, but like, you're gonna have to believe me. And I shouldn't have to be like, hey, do you want to see all my medical records to everyone? Like, we need to believe people that this is what their experience is. And so when you deny a trans experience in this world and say that that doesn't make sense to you, that's because it's not your experience. It's their experience, and their experience is valid, and we need to believe them.
And I'd love to, because I'm going to go back just a little bit further. You know, the whole idea of the welfare queen was just a distraction to make you think that the people who are drawing the most from government help are individuals. And when it comes down to it, look at all these subsidies and bailouts. And like, I don't think anyone ever went up to a bank and said, well, I don't think you look sick in the middle of that, what was it, 2008 crash. Or, you know, they don't go up to like ExxonMobil and say, well, you don't look sick. What do you need our help for? Like,
you don't deserve it.
Right. They just give it. There's no question.
Yeah,
so
we're deciding, who's worthy and who's worthy of help and who's not. And that gets gross. Right. And so we villainize the most vulnerable among us, like single moms. And then we don't hold the fathers or partners or spouses accountable that left them in those situations or whatever, you know, that why are we demonizing single moms for being in a really scary, hard situation and not holding the people accountable that put them there, and that we don't help them get out? And especially if they didn't have the privilege and opportunity of an education like I did, then what? And we don't have great options for childcare that are affordable. And that's really important work too. And I was a stay-at-home mom that was often asked to just babysit another kid like it was no big deal. And it's a big deal. Like, we want the best raising our children. We need to have people that can be fairly compensated and that are educated in child development and can provide, you know, developmentally appropriate and stimulating activities and teach emotional intelligence and those areas too. Like, we need to support, and it honestly feels like women a lot of the times in every step of life, if that's what we are saying, that we want to create more children and people and lives, then we have to go to like, well, are women getting the opportunity for an education, and are they getting, you know, sex education and being able to to decide for themselves when and how they have children, and you know, those reproductive rights and things like that too. And that we have to believe women, we have to support women and all genders, because it's not this black and white thing anymore, and our society doesn't support it. And we need to be able to support all people to be able to have the same equal opportunities and rights.
And this is going back to an earlier conversation we had, but I think this also applies here, where I had made a note that said labels impede meeting oneself. And I think it's kind of that whole rigid thinking where there has to be one or the other, that really squares us off into years of trying to live someone else's idea of what our life is, and we never actually find it ourselves. And giving people the space and the self-respect and the trust to let them meet themselves, I think is something that really is going to help a lot of this. And I think this is a very recent idea. I mean, maybe going back to the 60s is when you first started to see just an inkling of it. But then, you know, there was that hard snap back in the 80s. And now we're kind of getting to the point now where it's like, okay, maybe yelling at you to be someone you're not is not the way to go.
Yes.
We can just trust you that you know yourself. And especially with our own kids, empowering them with the idea that they know themselves and it's their right to be able to find themselves, I think is going to make a stronger adult.
Yes. And I think that was something that was really interesting and hard for me as a parent, especially in the religious conservative background that I came in with the really rigid gender roles and stuff too, was that I had these expectations for my children that weren't fair. To meet these religious requirements and these societal gender norm requirements, ability, intellectual, like just expectations that were not fair. And you can't have children and have expectations for them. I know that sounds hard for people to have, and a lot of people do a lot of harm trying to live vicariously through their children and we all have to teach our children the best that we can with what we know, but that allowing my children to just unfold into who they are has been the greatest privilege of my life. Beyond those expectations, that I just get to love them so much and teach them the best things that I can to be a good human being. And then I just get to watch them be who they are. And it has healed parts of me that were never allowed to be who I was, that I self-abandoned my entire life to be what I was supposed to be. And that has a toll. That has a very high cost. And if we define ourselves by these rigid gender roles and these relationships, instead of allowing women to be whole human beings, not our mothers, not our wives, not our sisters, not our, like just whole human beings, not how they relate to anyone else. And we define them so much by that wife and motherhood role that it's not fair. And we're limited and put in those boxes. And the interesting thing about labels is that like we talked about now, having more inclusive labels and things like that to help us to convey understanding. And that's a different thing than putting people in a box. And when I went to college 20 whatever years ago, it was very much the movement of like hating labels, don't label your kids, whatever, likes that. And I have a child that has autism, and I needed to be able to have a way to explain his differences that elicited compassion and some immediate understanding. And I had him tested since he was 2 until he was diagnosed at 11 every single year. And he was always, boys are a little bit slower in developing. It's probably because he was born premature or things like that. He was going to slip between the cracks, and I couldn't let that happen. And I had done my practicum as doing developmental screenings. And so I recognized these things, and I understand that they were subtle for my son and things like that too. But I needed to find a way to explain something to him, because then when we moved and are meeting all these new people and nobody knows what he's like, and I needed to explain it. And it was really difficult to say, well, he has some social and emotional delays. And they're like, well, what does that mean? And so I'm like trying to give specific examples. And now that I can say he has autism, and even if they assume the most profound level of autism, it's met with compassion instead of judgment. That this kid is just so immature and so entitled and throwing a fit and has the worst parents and stuff. Like, we're so mean and we judge each other so harshly. And I really, I am a diehard pessimist. I always have been. But as I've studied human development and psychology and stuff, and I saw the capacity for human minds to change and learn and evolve and grow, I have this maybe even delusional hope in human beings to be better than they are. And that I hate that we assume that people will lie and cheat and steal and exploit. And I know we see it everywhere, but I don't think the data shows that is the majority of people. And so when we, especially in terms of like welfare and stuff, if there are people that are exploiting the system, if that is even possible, then does it matter? Because we're helping so many people who actually need it. And if we look at the data, which is always my favorite thing, to see what is actually happening, not what we think is happening, but the most fraud comes from providers billing for things that they don't do and just pocketing the money. It's not these people that need the money that are exploiting it. And I think there's just so much tangled up in that, but we just need to have so much more compassion and kindness and understanding for people, not assume the worst.
Yeah, that happened to my dad. Not even in terms of the assistance kind of thing. That actually happened to my dad when he had a heart attack. He had a surgeon bill him $30,000, and they weren't even in the building that day.
Wow.
So it's pretty pervasive. There's a lot of fraud, but it's not usually the person who needs the help. Right.
But that doesn't get communicated effectively to the general public, and especially when we use such a loaded word as fraud, and everyone's like, immediately, and assuming that they're just bad people taking advantage of the system. And you're like, well, maybe there are, but they're fewer, and they're the ones that are making all the money in the first place off these people in healthcare. And it's endlessly frustrating.
Well, I was just going to go back. So speaking of general public and big loaded words, there is one word you used that maybe people outside of academia aren't familiar with, and I was hoping you could expand about that. What does practicum mean, and can you explain it to people who maybe don't understand what that is?
Sure. Yeah. So when I did my undergraduate, and it was in child and family studies, I minored in psychology. I did a practicum, which is similar to an internship. It's just they can pretty much be interchangeable words. You know, we have in different industries, and in medicine, we have residencies and internships, and in mental health counseling, I'm going to have an internship and a practicum. Like, it's just different applied learning experiences where you get to use the knowledge that you have in a practice safe, supervised way, so that you can gain the experience to be able to be on your own. And so I did my practicum as a child life specialist at a hospital and worked with child life specialists there under their supervision, and did developmental screenings in that. And I loved it. It was amazing.
Right on. And I just really wanted to dive into that because that's a big word, and I didn't want you to skip past it because it's an important word. And I think it really lends a lot of credibility to this is not just your opinion. A lot of the stuff you're saying is not only because of things you've learned in school, but things you've learned applied. And I think that's really, really important to recognize.
Yeah. And again, like I have children. I've been, my oldest is 20. And so I've been at this a minute, but I think the important thing too, is that, like, not only does it come from an educational background and, a personal experience background, but that, you know, we're, as parents, especially, we're all learning on the job, and every child is different. And I think that we need to give parents a lot more support and a lot more grace and a lot more compassion and understanding that what works for one child is not going to work for another. And we think that there's this one size fit all to parenting, and that tough love is the best way, or gentle parenting is the best way. And this is honestly the thing that I would push the most, is that teaching children how to be emotionally intelligent and using what's called emotion coaching. I read in my parenting class in college a book by Dr. John Gottman that's called How to Raise an Emotionally Intelligent Child. And to this day, of all the many, many, many parenting books I've read, it is still my favorite. And it's a little hard to get into at first, but that the Gottmans study marriage, relationships, and he can predict divorce with like a 93, 96% accuracy rate, just observing them and stuff. And he wrote this book when they had their daughter and were trying to find the best ways, you know, to raise her and to help her be a happy, successful, well-adjusted human being. And so I think it's a really important tool to have, because it's not addressing what any expectations of what you want them to be or putting them in a box of any kind, but it's teaching them how to feel their feelings and to identify them and be able to express them and process them in healthy ways. And that's, you know, we talk about behaviors a lot in parenting, and that how do I get my kid to stop hitting, and how do I get them to do this? And we focus on the outcome, and that punishment, taking away everything that they love, may get you the desired behavior that you want, but at what cost? And a lot of times it's the emotional safety of the relationship you have with your child. And so this, on the other hand, emotion coaching and stuff is bonding and humanizing, because as much as we want just really obedient children that have no problems and never test our patience and stuff, like, that's not reality. And they're little humans with really big emotions that are just learning how to process this and feel this. And oftentimes we have higher expectations for children and their behavior than we do of adults. I mean, we see politicians being absolute bullies, and is that behavior that you would tolerate in your child? No. And so it's like, how do we address that? And yes, you can do punishment, but it will cost you the emotional safety of your child. It is effective in getting changes in behavior, but it has a cost. And the thing that we see too, though, in the data, and this is, I say I'm a data whore all the time, because again, like, it doesn't matter what I think or what you think, because our experience is limited based on our experience, but what is actually happening. And so I always go to the data, that it's like, well, let's see what's happening. And that we see that punishment is not effective long-term, and that it causes harm. And so we need to do something different. And people are so resistant to change.
And, you know, kids are just little tape recorders, and they're going to take what you did when you parented them, and they're going to do that to your kids. So you're asking right now, do you want your grandchildren to be yelled at? Do you want your grandchildren to feel unsafe? And you got to look at that in terms of your kids. And I'm kind of wondering if this is in the neighborhood of what you were talking about. What my dad did with me is, I had two parents. They were separated. I think they divorced when I was 2, and there was 2 very different parenting styles. And my mom was very, she did what was done to her, although I got a much kinder version of that. But still, it was, the spankings and because I said so's and stuff like that. And my dad only ever spanked me twice in my entire life as a kid. One was when I stole his car when I was 2 and ran it into 2 houses. And the other one, I hit him in the shin with a Hot Wheels track really hard and laughed about it. But every other time, he took the time, instead of getting mad at me, he explained what I did and why that can't keep happening, things like that. And I feel like I became a much deeper, like I had a much deeper understanding of why things worked. And I did the same thing with my kids. And now I'm kind of wishing I hadn't, to a point, and I'm going someplace with this, because my youngest can try and talk his way in and out of just about anything. And sometimes when I just want to be able to say no, it's like, oh no, that's a good point. And it's like, but I feel like I'm building a better adult that way.
Yes. And that's the thing too, that it all ties into the, like, we don't want to tell them what to think. We want to teach them how to think. We don't want to tell them what to feel. We want to teach them how to feel. We don't want to teach kids to suppress their emotions and not address them, because then they will demand to be felt eventually in the most unkind ways of mental or physical illness. And that's something that harms women in the terms of like suppressed female rage, and that hurts men in terms of like their suppressed emotions of anything but anger as being a weakness. And so we need to just allow for people to be human and to have all the emotions, and then to find ways that you can feel it without fear of being overwhelmed or that you'll get stuck. And this is honestly what, therapy is so important for, and being able to help people understand this connection and the language to understand what's going on and be able to explain what they're experiencing, so that we can help them be able to deal with the things in their life. Because again, as children and stuff, like, our parents do the best that they can with what they know at the time. And oftentimes that's what was done to us. And a lot of us think we didn't turn out that bad. And but we can always do better. And that's what the generational healing is doing, is that, like, your mom was able to offer you a kinder version, and there was improvement, and she is trying. And so it's like, there are things that I have done that in my parenting that, like, I'm nowhere near perfect. And but my children will know what it looks like for a parent to apologize and to repair a relationship. And because they're going to need that, because they are human, they will mess up. They need to know how to repair and apologize too. And instead of just expecting perfection from parents and children and everybody, like, we need to give each other more grace and compassion in this learning, messy process.
And I think that's really important too, that you had said something about, men have like a couple of different emotions, and they're really basic. Those are the ones that are allowed to express. But the reason why we're told to do this, in let's just pull back the curtain a little bit from the gender experiences. For us, a lot of it is you have to act a certain way because, that'll attract the opposite sex. That'll attract women. That's, if you're weak, you want to attract women. But what I have learned through my life by listening to women, and by all means, there is no singular answer. There's no one thing that women want blank, and it's going to be true across the board. We're talking in general here. We're talking as a generalization.
Yeah, for anyone.
Yep.
Yeah.
The ironic part is, what's more attractive to an average woman? A man who is angry and tough, or one that's internally secure and isn't like, like a puddle of tears or anything all the time, but like actually can process his emotions in a healthy way and is internally secure and not constantly competing with everybody? Like, where is it like, are we shooting ourselves in the foot?
Yeah. So that's interesting too, because the thing that we're not allowing for is still there's an expectation of perfection or strength, or having, like, never being sad or never being whatever, instead of, like, if you have depression as a man and stuff, you're like, oh man, like, that is so shameful that I can't handle myself, and that I feel so sad and I have no reason, and like, I just need to hide it. I can't acknowledge this thing. No, like, you deserve help. You deserve to feel those feelings, and you deserve help and support to be able to heal those parts of you that suffered, that so that you can be, you know, have a happy and fulfilled life and not be so sad and depressed all the time. But there is no shame in having those struggles, in feeling those emotions. In college, I was raised very religious, conservative. Anger was a sin. And it was all about controlling anger and controlling emotions. And that when I went to college and stuff, it was very much that there's no such thing as a bad emotion. They may feel unpleasant, but it's not bad. And emotions aren't meant to be judged. They just are. And they're information for us to be curious about. And not every emotion needs a deep analysis and whatever, or processing. Sometimes we can just let them flow through us and observe them and let them go. There are times they need to be addressed. But it's learning how to do that is the most important thing. That's the emotional intelligence, that's the emotional maturity, and that's what we need to teach children from a young age, regardless of sex and gender. It's just being human.
Yeah, and I want to go back again. I'm leaving myself little notes because you have a lot to say, and no. Don't ever be sorry for that. Like, all of this is worth hearing, and like, I really feel like everything you're saying is valuable. So I've taken to just writing some notes down and coming back to them later, because I'm kind of getting lost in what you're saying, and it's like, nope, okay, I'm gonna look back because I totally forgot about what I was gonna say because I'm so busy processing what you're saying. One of the things I feel like is important to go back to, though, is something when you're talking about men deserve help. I also think men deserve love and compassion and the ability to have someone they can be vulnerable to. But then again, we're socialized to push all that away because that's admitting weakness. And like, so much of this, I've said this will probably be like the fourth time I've mentioned it, and I'm 6 episodes in. The male loneliness epidemic is largely a self-inflicted wound. And I made a reel about this that I put up on Instagram where it likens bad financial advice, like these get-rich-quick seminars, to the dating advice that men get. It's not meant to help you. It's meant to establish a baseline of awfulness, and it's meant to keep you isolated and manipulatable. And, you're this malleable person who's eager to hear what's going to actually work, and you never stop and think, oh, this isn't working. And the one demographic that we should be asking and listening to as men is going, hey, women, what do you want? Like, not in like a dismissive way, like, oh, what do you want this time? But like, hey, what are you actually looking for? What is it that I should be trying to do if I want your attention? And then actually do that, not do our version of it, but like actually learn how to negotiate, similar to what we did at the beginning of this, figuring out, what we were going to talk about. Learn how to negotiate what's going to work for both of you. And if it's an incompatibility from the get-go, okay, moving on. But like, if there's some room to if there is room to compromise,
and learn.
Hey, yeah. And it's like, hey, and get to know that person, and maybe you guys will do things differently both together. But like, all of that starts with communication and vulnerability. And it's exactly the opposite of the advice we're given.
Yes, this is so interesting too, because I am 42 and single and in the dating world, and that is very bizarre and weird. And but there's a lot to it too. But one of the things you're talking to that's really frustrating for me though too is that we treat finding a partner as though it's like, I'm going to catch a man, or I'm going to how do I get a woman? Like, we're focusing on the wrong thing. It's about human connection. And so regardless of sex and gender and all those things, that if you're wanting a romantic relationship and that's the direction you're going with that human connection, that's different. And then there's friendship, and there's different ways that we connect with human beings. And so it's important that we understand this, because any of those quote unquote tactics are manipulative. You're trying to get a result. You're trying to influence that person's feelings by presenting yourself in a certain way that is inauthentic. And so if you don't go into dating and relationships being your authentic self, then someone is going to fall in love with a version of you that isn't real or sustainable. And don't we all want to be loved for exactly who we are, the way that we are, with our flaws, and be given the grace and compassion and patience and all those things to learn and evolve? Because I have, we in my area, my friends, we all married very young, and must have been married about 20 years now. And there are some really amazing couples that have gone through complete evolutions together, but they chose each other first, no matter what. Everything else was, they chose their family first. And I really have such great admiration for that. And especially that they weren't willing to just give up so quickly, that they tried. And that's, my divorce came as a surprise to me one morning, and he told me he'd filed for divorce, and that was it. It was never, I'm not happy, or we should go to counseling or anything like that. And that was really hard, that I wasn't worth the effort, or that this family and life that we had created was not even worth trying for. And I think that there is a lot of hard work in relationships, that we are hardwired for connection, but we really struggle as human beings to relate to each other and to communicate effectively. And that it honestly comes down to a lot of just empathy and grace and compassion for being human too, and the limitations of what that all entails. But I do think, though, that it's really frustrating too in terms of the dating thing, and that we're listening, men telling men what women want is inherently problematic to me. Unless you're looking at what the data of women collected says, then you don't have the right to speak for women and their experience. And I don't have the right to speak for all women, because that's not my experience either. I can only speak to what is my experience and what I have an education in. And I don't profess to be an expert on anything. I'm just a curious person who's trying to do my best and learn. But I think that approaching things often with curiosity instead of judgment is our best approach to the differences that we see in us and other people in whatever context that happens. And if you can just be curious about someone and understand why they think what they think, it will often become pretty clear to you, based on their experience in their life, why they think that way. And or maybe they never thought about it because of their privilege and stuff. And so you're giving them an opportunity to think, and you're not telling them what to think. You're showing them and giving the chance just to think for themselves about what they believe and want, not what someone spoon-fed them as was the rules, or the religion, standards, values, whatever that were expected of them.
I'm sitting in an airport right now editing the podcast, and I'm looking at the time on the podcast, and this is going to be a 2-hour episode. So I think right now I'm going to pause the conversation with Amber and split this up into a second part. So see you next episode.